Well, what's happening out there, everybody? You are in Color Commentary, colorful conversations by colorful people about Christianity, culture, and race. I'm your host, Markus Lloyd, and with me, as always, is Mr. Antwuan Malone. What's happening, Mr. Antwuan? How you
What's
feeling
up,
today, man?
What's up? How's it going? I'm doing good. I think
Yeah.
I'm doing good. Getting ready for the holiday, but they won't just let us relax. We got these things going on this week, so
I
we
know.
gotta get in here and weigh in. I guess we gotta weigh in and see what is the deal. Hopefully you guys who are joining us come on in and be a part of the conversation. We're testing some new software where we can get people from YouTube and Facebook at the same time, see all of your comments, your questions and comments and thoughts. And so go ahead and post. This is supposed to be a live conversation between us two and you guys. So let's all be part of it, weigh in. But man, what do you think about these two big cases that's surely going to produce a lot of conversation over the next few days?
Yeah, are you asking me that question, or is this a question you're putting out to
I'm asking you and all the people. Yeah, everybody. What do you guys think? The graphic says, "Is justice served?"
Yeah.
Or was justice served? So I suppose that's the question for the chat.
Yeah.
Do you feel justice was served in these two cases?
Yeah, it's going to be. I don't know currently, right? That in the conversation, I've seen much discussion about whether justice was actually served. Like, I don't know if I've seen that yet. Although I know that it may be a matter of time. I've kind of been going back and forth, reading certain papers. Again, this just happened, right? So reading certain papers, going back and forth between kind of news outlets that don't always agree, just to kind of hear like what everybody is talking about. And it seems right now that the conversation or the question of justice is not necessarily the meat of the conversation. It's just information gathering right now.
Right.
It's just information communication. So I'm really going to be curious about this, and we can talk about it later, but I am very curious about how people will handle the optics of the Ahmaud Arbery case and the Rittenhouse case. They're very similar, right? There's so much discussion right now in the midst of both of these cases around this collaborating point of the vigilante, taking law into their own hands, right? That's a central aspect of both. Both were saying, I'm going in here to try to, at least what we're seeing is they're going in here with some type of weaponry to make a difference, to make some sort of impact on the situation that they thought was happening.
Yeah. To right some sort of wrong they perceived. They took it into their own hands to right their perceived wrong.
Correct. The only thing I would say is in the Rittenhouse case, it was the articulation from Kyle Rittenhouse was not necessarily going there to right or wrong necessarily, but to sort of provide kind of a protection, to make sure things didn't get out of hand, to be a paramedic, right, to help, that kind of stuff. So I don't know if it was articulated as cleanly as the gentleman who shot Ahmaud Arbery, where they literally like, we're going to make a citizen's arrest. We are practicing this citizen arrest, right that we have. So that would be the only sort of caveat, I think, to the motives of the vigilante sort of move. So the optics of it, though, I mean, there are some interesting optics from a justice standpoint, if that's the right case, or even from a race standpoint, right? Because the optics are actually flipped to where people might have assumed they would be when we got to this point, right? The optics that we heard a couple of days ago is, you got Kyle Rittenhouse, a young white man, running into a protest, and he kills two white men, wounds another, and he is innocent. And then you have this situation, which Ahmaud Arbery is killed by basically three white men. One pulled the trigger. And they are guilty. I think in a very, like, what's the word? I don't know. In a very pessimistic world, about a week and a half ago, if you would have said, hey, right before Thanksgiving, we're going to have the Kyle Rittenhouse case and the Ahmaud Arbery case out, and we're going to find that the white guy who shot the white guy was innocent, and the white guys who shot the black guy is guilty, I think they would have flipped it. You know what I mean? I think they would have been like, it's more probable that the white guy shooting the white guy is going to be guilty, and the white guy shooting the black guys are going to be not guilty, right? Like that's more probable based on the history of these cases, right? So I'm curious what people are going to do, sort of politically, even with this optic around this conversation, because I know that there are some, when the Rittenhouse case came out, who were like, yeah, justice has been served. But it may actually not benefit them to say justice was served in this moment for their political movement going forward, and vice versa. Um, it would be much cleaner to say, hey, this is a great thing. You know, it's a great thing, but it's much cleaner in some ways from an optics and propaganda standpoint to say, see, now it proves that white people are much more in danger than black people in the midst of this country. They're the ones who aren't getting the justice. They're the ones being discriminated against. I think I'm curious if people are going to move into that optic space. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it probably not immediately. It might show
Right.
up later, because what we're going to get right
Candace
now
wants
is
to
just
jump in tonight and say something, but
right. What we're going to get right now is basically just that, the cases were rightly judged. Hopefully, everyone's saying it. I've not come across anything that's like irate or upset about the results of the Ahmaud Arbery case. Like I suspect I would have gotten from the Kyle Rittenhouse situation.
sure.
But so I think there's a lot of people that feel like, and maybe I'm giving benefit of the doubt, but it's just a matter of time, I suppose. But I have not yet seen where someone's like, man, white people have it's a discrimination against white people that these guys were, and an unjust thing. Although what I do expect to hear from people is that the jury probably felt pressure from the Rittenhouse case to lean into guilty for this case, and I suspect that argumentation is going to show up at some point.
Yeah, I think if what I'm also expecting to hear, and I'm hearing just little tidbits of it, is that for some, this case for Ahmaud Arbery won't be enough to convince them that we're in a season where justice will be served more regularly to people of color. You're hearing a little bit of that right now. I think people are talking about, hey, this is great, right? Like, I think justice is served, right? This is what people are saying. Hey, I think justice is served. But in the midst of it, they're also going, would this have been served, right? There's always the would it have been if question, right?
Well,
so the Rittenhouse is like, would it have been if it was a black man? Would it have happened? But in this, it's would it have been served if there was no video? Right. If there was no video, there's no video and outrage by the society who saw it, however many, I think it was like 3 months later or something, like nobody even knew about it.
At least 30 days. It went at least 30 days where
it was a leaked video.
It was 30 days. Yeah. A leaked video, which they weren't, nothing was going to happen. Those guys wouldn't have even been charged at all. It would just,
they were sitting at home eating their Mother's Day meal. Right. This is they having a good time. And nobody knew anything about it. I think it was one of the defendants who actually took this video and released it to somewhere. And we talked about this, I think, during the summer when this came out.
When it came out.
That he like the motivation of like, why are you showing this video? You're showing this video as a kind of evidence of innocence in your mind. Like, you thought this video would actually show this made sense. As opposed to it becoming really the thing, and maybe some would say the only thing that secured your possibility of guilt in this case. Because, with George Floyd and with Ahmaud Arbery, we have video evidence. And so the question I think some people come back to sort of and I'm not going to say pessimistic and a pejorative, but the doubting,
it's cynical.
The cynical, that's a great way to say it. The cynical thought is, yes, this is great, but if the video wasn't there, would we see this? And I don't know. What do you think about that kind of response, maybe to the case?
I think it reveals the general distrust that is apparent still in the racial landscape of the country, and I think that distrust is on sort of all sides of the racial spectrum. That you could. Again, in some ways, this is progress. As an American, you're like, good. I'm speaking about the Ahmaud Arbery, case specifically. As an American, you're like, good, because an American citizen was shot, and in America, that sort of stuff shouldn't happen. So, as an American, you can say, hey, we together, black, white, and otherwise, agree that we can't have that sort of behavior in our country. And in that sense, we could be corporately celebrative. We can celebrate together about that under the banner of America. But then when you go one step into that and you say, okay, well, as a black man and as a white man, which unfortunately we still have to consider, because we don't have to, but we consider, we look at it and you say, well, as Americans, it's good. But as a black man, it would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for you darn kids or whatever, like the Scooby-Doo thing. And I would have gotten away from it. Got away if it weren't for you, if it weren't for this video, if it weren't for people who drove at it, then it just would have kept going. And those guys, their justice would not have been served. And there's enough evidence to support that. It went for 30 something days. And the question becomes, well, were they ever going to do anything? They tried to kill the story, all the things. So I guess it's a wrong that's corrected, and we can be excited about that.
Yeah.
And that part of it is a win. But at the same time, the two wrongs, the first wrong being the act itself, and the second wrong being the way the legal response to that, the police and the legal response to that was a wrong by just letting it go for so long.
Sure.
That both of those things require some sort of correction.
Yeah.
And so we've got one of them, but we're not talking so much about the other one. And that the other thing, the fact that this case wouldn't have even been brought forward had it not been for an outrage, is part of the conversation that sort of bleeds into that trust space or distrust space that we're just talking about.
Yeah, and I think talking about this idea of mistrust, distrust, I feel like even having this conversation, that there's probably people out there going, man, what do you guys want?
Yeah,
what do you want? Like this, I mean, we got this. This is great news. Like celebrate. Like this is proof that America is going in a good direction. Like sit in that. Like why do you have to bring up this other stuff? And I would say, like, the conversation around race is many times gets around this conversation of isolated incidents versus systemic stuff. And what you have to recognize is, one isolated sort of case in which we see somebody, coming to justice. The fact that we're going, hey, man, isn't this amazing? Should tell us that we've had a history where this doesn't happen a lot, right? That response of somebody even going, man, isn't like, look at this, is amazing. Like you going, yeah, because we're all thinking it's amazing because it hasn't happened. It doesn't happen regularly.
Yeah, it feels like an anomaly or whatever. And it shouldn't feel like that. It should be normal.
Yeah. And there's people out there going, oh my gosh, I'm so relieved, you know what I mean? And I'm proud, you know what I mean, of white people in the South. Like this is a progress. Well, again, the only reason you're proud is because it hasn't been this way. And so I think we're still in a position where we have some distrust. And what we want enough of these situations that the distrust dies, like it builds trust, right? Like it reminds me of my mother-in-law had this dog that was this Cocker Spaniel, like a really super cute dog. But the dog was like bipolar. The dog would like bite you for no reason. Like you'd go down to like pet her and she'd bite you, right? And so every time you'd look at this cute dog, you're like, I want to pet you, but I just don't trust you. And occasionally you'd be like, all right, let me go ahead and give it a shot. And you'd pet the dog and the dog would be just fine. You're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. What a soft, cute dog. This is amazing. But then a few minutes later, you'd come back again for it and she'd bite you, right? And so it doesn't need to be an anomaly, right? It needs to be something that happens over and over again for trust to be built. We recognize this in lots of situations in our life. And so you should be able to understand that for people of color, particularly Black people in a justice system, particularly in the South, in Georgia, to see a verdict go this way is such a rarity that you can't expect in one of those cases to be able to go, okay, I think we're good now. I think I can trust completely. But I will say that if I could say anything to my Black brothers and sisters, allow it to be something that starts to chip away at the distrust. Right? Just allow it to be that. It doesn't have to, you don't have to go all the way in. I'm not going all the way in, but I want to just be able to, if we're going to get to a place where we are actually living in a country where people can engage in, in good reconciliatory conversation and good unity, like we have to start building trust. And when we can see a place where we can trust something happen, then it's good. The optics are hard though, again, because like what you said earlier, if there wasn't a video, would it have happened? If there wasn't outrage about it after the video came out that was leaked, would that, would they even have gone to trial? That kind of thing. So that's the only thing, again, that puts a little bit of that too.
Yeah, and I think what we're discussing, again, it is celebratory. We're all happy, again, on multiple levels, as Americans, as Black people, as white people, maybe, as
yeah, absolutely,
certain white people, right?
Like Americans,
yeah. So
if it is a good, that's a good thing for America, right?
Yeah. So it is a good thing. So no one's poo-pooing the good thing, and it is something to rejoice always about, as well, to rejoice about. What we're articulating is why someone might come to the room and be like, okay, so are you ready to put down all the conversation? Because this is the proof that the issues you've been fighting for are no longer real. And that's when someone would have to come to you and say, well, not exactly. It's not the home run you thought it was. We did get to home base.
We got on base.
But it wasn't the home run that you thought it was. So we still have a little bit to go. And the truth is that most Black people who understand their history in America know that real progress for real racial progress is usually come with adversity. And we've had to fight for it, and we've had to be consistent in that fight. We had to say it and bring it up and continue to sort of keep the pressure on. And so it does create a kind of hesitancy to sort of say, hey, okay, we're here, and to kind of, go to neutral when you can accept it and keep moving is really what we want to do. Like you said, we want to see more cases like this that end well, not that ends in white people going to jail for the wrong thing.
Right.
But that does end in justice being served in white people or brown people, whoever. Going to jail for the right things. And and there's been a lot of stuff, man. Like the killers of the Malcolm X, they were just released.
That's right.
So there's a lot of things going on in the American judicial system. It looks like there's little places where we see these various corrections that are kind of showing up here and there. And those are good. Those things are progress. I do think that America is making some progresses. And we can celebrate some of those progresses.
Well, and what you said is that I thought was really apropos is so much. It seems like it, again, if you take sort of the history of these kinds of cases, kind of walking them through even up till now, it seems like even when you get justice, there seems to be these forces that are trying to act against that, right? If it gets in, they're conned into the justice, they're manipulated into the justice, they're yanked and clawing their way into the justice. And even the fact that you're sitting here in a case, right? You're dealing with the American judicial system where wonderfully you have juries and you have trials and you have lawyers and people are defending and whatever. The fact that these guys said not guilty, they put in a not guilty plea to take it to court where they were putting it in front of juries and lawyers and all those kinds of things, shows that there wasn't this sort of sense that they in themselves saw it. But then once it gets into the trial, you are ultimately watching people who are fighting to win the trial, right? Who are fighting for what we would say open and closed case injustice. There is a whole side that has put thousands of dollars into trying to defend these people who shot Ahmaud Arbery. And they're doing tricks of the trade to try to make it, to try to coerce the judge and the jury to seeing their side. Even in the jury selection, they are doing different things where they're disqualifying types of people that may make it difficult for them to win this case. In this particular situation, they're looking and they're disqualifying African-American jurors, right? So, and for whatever reason, but maybe the reason is just because they're Black and they don't want them to sort of empathize with this situation just because of the racial undertones, right? And in the midst of that jury, right, we had this amazing thing where we had, I think it was 11 white people and one black person in there. And that was something that people were really nervous about too, because it seemed like unfair, even because you're in the South, like one black jury person, what's that going to do? But you have this whole version of defense that is trying to prove that this is not a bad thing, that it was, and even to the point where they victim blame, right? Even to the point where they say certain statements, like the lawyer who was up for the defense team is getting a lot of flack for her defense, for her sort of, I guess, the closing that she did, where she's basically in the midst of the closing, she's turning Ahmaud Arbery into a victim because of the choices that he made, right? Like the choices to run in that neighborhood, right? But she says this thing, she goes, in his khaki shorts, running through the neighborhood, right? In his khaki shorts, quote, in his khaki shorts with no socks to cover his long, dirty toenails, unquote. That's in her closing. She is the defense of the reason why these guys were able to kill Ahmaud Arbery is A, he shouldn't have been running in that neighborhood, and B, because he's got bad hygiene, right? She's setting it, she's not even subtly, right? She's trying to coerce the jury of really the 11 white people, because the black person wouldn't have fallen for this because the black person does not see themselves as inferior, hopefully, but trying to coerce this group of 11 white folks into seeing this Ahmaud Arbery as less than human, therefore not worthy of a human response, right? Or a just response, right? Worthy of being stalked, chased down by three men in trucks, one with them with a Confederate flag on it, for these men to come at gunpoint to attack him. And then because he threw a punch, that was the speculation, he fought back against these men, that it was self-defense now for this person to kill him, right? Like the defense is trying to bring that story in to fight against this verdict being guilty. And so that goes to the point of, is that people don't come willingly in it, that there's always this fight. And I'm curious, right? Because if you're on the side of, if you're in that conversation where you're always like, hey, this black person should have been doing this, should have been doing that, will you find a scapegoat for this? Right? What's going to be the story that because there's got to be somebody that's going to come out and feel like this was unjust to do. I'm just curious, and I can't wait.
It's going to have to. It's got to be around self-defense, which is the connection to Rittenhouse. Yeah, and on some level, the two having such a close relation to each other, with self-defense being so important to those cases, presents a really interesting thing to observe, right? Because who has the right to self-defense here in Ahmaud Arbery? He has a right to self-defense. He's just jogging. If it's true that he's just jogging, and next thing you know, he turns around and there's a truck coming at him, right, speeding at him aggressively, which if he's like any other black person already, whether that truck was going to drive by him or stop at him, create some anxiety to start with, then it turns out that they are actually coming after him and they want to apprehend him. They haven't told him why. They don't know. He doesn't know anything about any of it. Doesn't know what's going on. So he goes and seeks to defend himself from danger. Well, and then they seek to defend themselves from his defense of himself. One of the prosecutors, did a good job, I think, of saying your right to self-defense is disqualified when you are the creator of the altercation or the situation. Yeah. You no longer get to use self-defense if you started the situation, if you were the initiator or you formulated that. And she said it much better than I did there. Right. But that becomes the question. That becomes the question. I don't think that anybody who's thinking would use that argument in this case. I think Ahmaud Arbery, if you're going to side with Kyle Rittenhouse as self-defense, then you cannot not side with Ahmaud Arbery's self-defense. in this case, because that would be the only thing that he did. Even if he was trespassing, it's not something that he should have died over. And it's not his job
by a citizen.
Yeah, by saying it's not his job to hand himself over to citizens who decide to take it upon themselves to execute some sort of civic justice because they want to make some citizens arrests. There's a reason why there's police with laws and you got to read your rights and all these things. You have to write your rights out. Like citizens arrests don't do all of that. So legally, yeah, it's a little more, it feels like it should be a little more open and shut. It wasn't though, because at the time there was all this argumentation around Ahmaud Arbery's case and whether these people were shooting or not.
Well, and whether he had been trespassing, whether he had stolen things. Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There was there's all these kind of these things. It's like originally it's like, hey, there's been thefts in the area. Okay, so that warranted them attacking. Here's video of him going into this, half-built house, right? And so, why would he go and do that? And then of course, like a couple of days later, there was all these other videos where you see white people going to the house, you know what I mean? That they do in my neighborhood when a house is being built. They just kind of stop off. Let me go check a look and see what's going on in this house. You have the owner of that house going, hey, nothing was stolen here. People go through it all the time. He didn't see it. And the owner was like, actually, where he was going, he was heading to a water source that I actually have right there. So maybe because he was out jogging, maybe he was just looking for a faucet. He ain't going to some white person's house who he doesn't know and who's fully built to do that. Well, maybe I can get water at this place. But anyway, there was all this speculation. They were trying to sort of capture him as some kind of criminal so that the public could see a reason that was other than racism for these men to sitting on the front porch, seeing a black man run by, for them to get their guns, get in trucks and go follow him to try to arrest him. Because I think nobody wants to believe that there are people who are sitting out there with a kind of bias so strong that they would do that kind of thing. Because again, we want to believe we're in a post-racial society. But what this case is reminding us of is that it is not a post-racial society. Sure, there's lots of white people who would not have made that leap of, hey, there's a black person running. We've had quote unquote thefts in the area. And if you go look at the record, right, then there's not the theft that happened was of one of their guns out of their car. Right. So it was a personal theft that they were kind of responding to and making complete assumptions and assertions about a black man running through that only a bias would lead to. But again, you can't call it that because racism or racist thoughts and bias don't exist for so many people. And so it only made sense. OK, we've got to make Ahmaud Arbery out to look like some kind of negative, bad criminal so that it doesn't only rest on this idea of bias. And here's what I'm anticipating. Here's what I'm anticipating the pushback's going to be. Why wasn't he just compliant? Why didn't he just?
I hope not. That would be such a weak.
No, but there's got to be such. I'm just trying to figure out like what
you're trying to anticipate. What is going to be the argument? Yeah,
it's going to come.
Is it surprise number 2? Would it be surprise number 2 that there is no argument?
Man, I would. Well, but here's the deal. George Floyd, to me, potentially. Maybe it's not as open as
there's going to be an argument one way or another.
The hard part about George Floyd, right, is because police were called to the scene because of disrupting, right, like the disturbance, his background, right, like again, not that because you have a background that involves kinds of sin in it that you deserve to die, but that's what's used against victims, particularly black victims. When white people or white police officers kill them, is we've got to make them seem like worthy of being killed, right? And so again, this is what we saw with Ahmaud Arbery. Trying to figure out ways to make him worthy of being killed. From a news standpoint, the lawyer tried to make it worthy of being killed by just talking about the fact that he has bad hygiene and that he's wearing khaki pants, you know what I mean, running, that kind of thing. So I just. But all that to say, in the George Floyd case, it was like 2.5 days. Everybody was on the same page. I was getting calls. People were crying to me on videos, right? And in 2.5 days, all of a sudden it switched, and it was back to the full division. In fact, it went further because you had to create such a venomous picture of the situation to be able to and propaganda around the situation to create this divide. So I'm just curious what is going to be the response, because you can't not have a response by those who would say that the justice system has been fair to Black people, that there is no racism.
I think it'll be reverse racism. It'll be that the woke mob is, they don't call it reverse racism, but it's the traditional
woke mob is going to be
reverse racism
for sure.
The woke mob has infiltrated the way the jurors thought, or in some way affected their ability to see the case as anything other than guilty, or that they are too afraid to not pass a verdict that would not have been guilty because it would have led to riots, or it would have led to, some sort of response that they didn't want. So they felt some sort of
county has 27% Black people
pressure.
in it. The county is 27% Black.
Well, but the nation's watching. So
the nation as a whole is 13% Black, but of course you got the woke mob. That's kind of what we're talking about, that comes after you.
Yeah.
If you are a juror,
I think if you were to get some, but I'm kind of hopeful that, or hoping that, saner heads prevail. That in this case, if you want to protect self-defense, again, sort of staying in the mental space, if you want to protect self-defense, you cannot celebrate the Kyle Rittenhouse case and deny, or whatever the opposite of celebrate is, reject the Ahmaud Arbery case, because at the heart of it, the issue is about self-defense and whether you have a right to it or not, and it's from a legal point of view, and so, but there I go thinking that people are thinking rationally. What we continually find is that when it gets to race, rational thinking is the second or third response. The first response is defense, or defense, and defense of self, defense of group, or what have you, and this sort of loyalty to your particular tribe. And that keeps people from just thinking rationally, about things, I think. So I'm hoping that saner heads prevail, but it probably won't be. You're probably going to get some people who cite the woke mob as pressuring the jury. They're going to cite self-defense as, you can't just throw a punch and not expect someone to respond to that. They're going to try to make it self-defense for these three men. Mm-hmm. And or they're going to say that Ahmaud Arbery, they're going to try to cast him as a villain, or as a criminal, or as someone who somehow deserved to be apprehended, and his resistance to that apprehension is a proof of bad character, if you will. So those are the ones that I expect, and I don't think I'm gonna give a whole lot of time to them because they're weak sauce. It's too weak. It's too weak. This case is one of the more clear cut cases, in a similar way that some people feel that the Kyle Rittenhouse case was very clear cut. To them, they're like, this is clearly self defense. And I'm not sure. But yeah.
Yeah, and there's two things that I was thinking about when you were talking about, is you were talking about this idea of starting to paint again, which they tried to do, paint Ahmaud Arbery as some kind of villain, right? Which I think is interesting. Like, all right, so we're sitting here having this conversation, and in the midst of this conversation, we are talking about two sides of this differently, right? We're calling it the Kyle Rittenhouse case and the Ahmaud Arbery case. One of them is the person who actually shot the gun, and one who got shot, in two different cases. Right? We're not talking about this as the McMichael case, which would be the complementary complement to the Kyle Rittenhouse, if we were to articulate it sort of promotionally. Hey, Rittenhouse case, McMichael case, or the three Michael and whoever Brian, I can't remember his last name is, case. We've tried to cast Ahmaud Arbery as the villain, but the two gentlemen who got killed and the one who got wounded in the Rittenhouse case, like, we're not even talking about those names. Like, people aren't talking about that.
Yeah, we don't even know who those people are.
Well, it's Joseph
I mean,
Rosenbaum.
we know who they are, but
that's
no
what I'm
one's
saying.
talking about them. Yeah,
we're not talking about them. There's no casting of them as a villain. What's casted?
You know what? Actually, there is. There is actually.
The Protest is a villain.
No,
they.
Yeah. So one of them was had a conviction. So there was a I think it's pedophile, had a pedophile conviction, because part of the deal has come up. The same thing happened in that case. It happens often in the black case, which is the guy whoever it is you want to protect, the other persons that they acted upon must be the worst scum of the earth.
Right.
So they found that some of those guys had some criminal background, and those people got the same treatment. They were dangerous leftist pedophiles pursuing Kyle Rittenhouse, and as if one crime makes you connects you with every sort of crime there is,
right.
But you're a pedophile, which I'm not for. I think pedophiles, I think they've done their time, and the justice has dealt with them, similar to the George Floyd. I'm not saying that stuff is fine, but I'm also not saying that because someone is a pedophile that suddenly that makes them more prone to murder, or any other, or theft, or robbery, or any other criminal thing. But the fact that you find any crime in someone's past immediately makes them, susceptible to any other crime is again a propagandic way of talking about that. But we didn't get the names of those people. We just got some of that narrative, as many who are wanting to protect Kyle as a hero, as a valiant do-gooder in the situation. They needed him to be doing good against bad things, bad people. Sure. And it wasn't going to be the riot itself. It was going to be the woke mob and the dangerous monsters therein.
Right. Well, and I think this is where there is credibility to saying, there's parts in which the media is trying to keep this conversation of black and white in the midst of it, right? Because again, they're talking about Kyle Rittenhouse, but then it's Ahmaud Arbery here. I think you could probably see that keeping it as this black and white sort of space is what continues the maybe the fodder to keep moving forward. But I think these two cases have a lot of similarities. I'll be curious. I wonder if these two cases will be sort of kind of cast together as we go into the future. You know what I mean? Because this is a moment where there can be kind of a flip or a switch in the justice system that people may see, as we talked about at the beginning here, of in this particular case, it didn't work out the way that all the stretch or the extremists would have thought it would work out. And I'm talking extremists on both sides, right? They would have thought the other way, and they were prepped to have arguments where it didn't work out certain ways, right? So now everybody's like, oh, this is kind of discombobulating. Like none of this is working the way I thought it would work out. And so now people are having to bring a new narrative. And if they want to keep people coming to their Twitter feed and giving money to their campaigns, right? Like they're going to have to figure out a way to make this work where their followers will still believe that they are solidified in the position that they've hoped they've been solidified in, so that they can continue to vote for them or follow them or whatever that thing is. So I do think there's going to be a problem. These two cases together, because the outcome are problematic for the animus that exists between the sides in some way. Like people are going to have to maybe give a little bit. There may be some confession. There may be some relenting. I'm just making up stuff, right? But I think
maybe not confession. There'll be some. Look, they can't win. They can't win with this dog right here. So you're just going to have to ignore this one. And I don't think anybody's minds are changed. Like if you were someone who believed that racism was not a problem in America, then you still think that, like it's not like you're not going to enter into the space of fighting for racial equality and racial reconciliation because of Ahmaud Arbery's case. Yeah, it's a neutral ground for that mindset. For the mindset that it is fighting for that, it's a base hit, to to keep
Uh-huh.
with the
That's the
to keep
baseball
with the
analogy.
basic
Yeah,
the
I like the
baseball
club with
analogies.
one. That's
Yeah,
good.
it's a base hit. It's not a home run. Okay, all right. Well, we still got to get around the bases, and so there's more to do. But we'll take the hit, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So and we'll get on base with it. So in that sense, it's fine, and it's good. Let me talk to the people for just a second. That if you're joining us for this conversation, thank you for joining us. It's live, and we have yet to get a comment from any of you. Maybe it's just that we're very riveting of a conversation, but the idea is, of course, for us to discuss together. So we love to hear some of your thoughts. Maybe there's something we said that you agree with really or disagree with, or some aspect you want to bring to the conversation that we're not discussing that we want to do, that you should share so that we can be a part of it. So feel free, don't hesitate. We thrive on your comments. So don't wait, as I would say if we were live. Like, look, don't wait for the first person. Just jump in.
Yeah.
So anyway. Yeah. So I mean, I think it's a deal.
Yeah. I'm curious, and maybe this is for the and I see Christine, how you doing down there? I'm glad you're riveted. Great. Great. I do wonder, because again, I think when you look at a case like this, you're trying to really analyze all the layers, right? You're trying to go, okay, so what happened in this case? What are we learning potentially? What do we need to analyze and evaluate about it? And I wonder if there's any kind of evaluation that needs to be, or this, again, overstatement potentially. But the fact that one of the McMichael men, the father, was an investigator that worked with the police, and he again sitting on his front porch watching this black man run by in his khakis, went and kind of made the assertion, kind of jumped to the assumption that this was a criminal maneuvering through his neighborhood that needed to be stopped. Does that reveal in some way a portion of the way that some in law enforcement may also be thinking, since that is the way this guy is thinking, right? Would that be fair to kind of start to go, okay, do we need to start thinking about this as we're engaging and talking about all law enforcement? If this guy who should know better, right? Who should do better because he's been trained better, if with all his training and all his background, he makes this kind of situation, does this actually make us more nervous going forward, even for law enforcement? I'd love to see if anybody has any thoughts about that. You got any thoughts?
Well, two things. The trained law enforcement person is trained to apprehend bad guys.
Fair enough. Yeah, but they're also trained to assess situations.
Right. So those are the two things. You got the apprehension of bad guys and you have the assessment of the situation. So the question is, his training was, how do you apprehend bad guys?
Mm-hmm.
Was his training how to appropriately understand who the bad guys are? Is that a part of the training? In other words, he saw a black guy running, put together
Profile.
Did a very bad Sherlock Holmes impression of of a quick investigation on observations, and came up with a conclusion that cast the guy as a bad guy. Yeah. And then he did what his training told him, which is to go apprehend said bad guy, And so it's a very interesting thing. The question becomes why and how did it become so evident to him that Ahmaud Arbery was a bad guy? Because that's what police are supposed to go after, and that's part of it. Now here's I'm gonna take a left for a second, or maybe it's not a left, but
Can you say that? The question, you say left, you're gonna take a turn.
Take a turn. Yeah, I know. Left is triggered now, so we can't. I'm gonna take 3 rights. Right. No, just playing.
I don't want you turning left. I want you to right.
So, but here's the question: is the charge is murder? The charge is not racism legally, right? Yeah, sure. So legally, they said he murdered, but the social world is going to look at it and they see murder, but they also see racism. So the question I have is this case for Ahmaud Arbery, was there enough here to prove racism or racist intent?
Yeah. Are you checking? Did you ask the question? Or you? I know you.
I'm asking. Yeah. I'm not going to provide my 2 cents on it yet, but it is the question. Like because there's the social court of opinion, if you will, the cultural court of opinion. What is it? Cultural? It's the court of opinion by society, and then there's of course the court, the legal courts. We got the murder, but because as you know, Marcus, I've been in this conversation about proving racism.
Sure.
Is
you going to do that here? Or are you just going to prove it?
No, I'm not. I'm not going to do all of that here, but I am going to ask a question with this case.
Yeah.
Is there enough here to prove racism by this individual, not by the system for the moment, right? We're not going to talk about the system. We're just talking about this individual or these three. Is there enough here to prove racism, or is it still nebulous? Is it still a question whether this was racially motivated or not? And if it is nebulous, if not racism, then what is it? Is sort of the question. So I don't know. It's hard for me to answer because I see racism. So I don't know what to replace it with.
But I'm curious because I think if you constantly are saying that racism doesn't exist, we're in a post-racial society. The law is colorblind and does not see race. People, only the Ku Klux Klan members and the alt-right and the Proud Boys see race. In this situation, what do you attribute it to? What made them make that decision to go and run after them? And to your point, like right now, we're just dealing with murder charge. There is another charge. There is another trial that has to happen around whether this is a hate crime, which is new. Because Georgia, up until I think last year, didn't even have any hate crime laws on the books, which doesn't really.
Are they going to do that with this case?
Yes. I was listening either to the news or reading an article about it, and they're talking about that there still have to do charges of hate crime coming up. So that will be a whole nother thing. Although there's question about whether they will keep pursuing that because they've gotten these charges now. And for me, I think a case around it being a hate crime is going to be very interesting and potentially can be a precedent-setting case for the long term, particularly around hate crime law and law enforcement. If they do this, I think this is a good case to try that out on personally. But yeah, I see
potentially because he floats the N-word.
Yeah, right.
Which is one of the most
the obvious. That's what everybody always says. Did you hear the N-word?
Evidence is so N-word shoot. Okay, so you at least think something of me, right? That is contrary. But then you got motivation. It's hard to prove motivation. But I just thought I'd bring it in because I think there's a lot of people who come to these conversations. They say, "Why is it always about race? Why can't it just be that these guys are idiots?" And that if this guy was a white guy, he would have gotten the same rundown because they're idiots, and why is it a quick assumption of race? And I think there's a lot of people who even in seeing the details of this case, they would accept the murder case, but they would still hold some reservation about whether this was really racially motivated or not.
Right. And just idiot motivated.
Idiot, just people who make really bad choices.
Well, and look, here's what I would say to that is, it's not that there aren't lots of types of idiots out there. But there's a lot of idiots out there, right? I'm even one occasionally.
I was about to say ID10T. I got my ID10T card over here.
I've got it, right? There's some idiots out there. I think when you're talking about a case like this, right, you have to I think so much of it depends less on this isolated incident, and also has to be taken into you also have to take into account sort of what's the history, like what is the full caseload around things like this. There's not a lot of cases out there and here's what I would say is I am not aware. Let's just say it like that. I'm not aware, and a judge could probably come in and say differently. I'm not aware of a lot of cases where idiots see somebody running in their neighborhood and they get their guys and go and shoot this guy, unless that they have no relationship with. You know what I mean? There's plenty of idiots out there who are like, I don't like that dude. He's running through our part of town. We got to kill this fool. There's lots of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can see that in gang violence, right? In certain Black communities and white communities and other communities that have gangs. You'll see that kind of mentality. But I don't know how many of those we see from kind of, 35-year-old, 52-year-old, and 65-year-old men who, when they see just anybody running through their neighborhood, that they immediately assume them to be a criminal, and therefore they go run them down to try to create a citizen's arrest. I just don't see that very often. What we do see, and this is actually some of the history of the citizen's arrest law that is in Georgia, is that law was created in many ways to keep track and to allow citizens to catch slaves who were wandering, who were running, who had escaped. It allowed them to have that right, so that they didn't have to have the police show up, in that case. But you could, as a citizen, if a slave was running away, you knew that slave was running away, that you could detain them and bring them in to bring them back to their masters. Right. So this is Georgia. That's where that law came from, in Georgia. So we have that law in place and we see it being practiced. We saw it, obviously, it got practiced with white looking at Black people in Georgia and in the South and in other parts of the country as well, but predominantly in the South, particularly because of the slave aspect. And here we are in 2021. We're seeing this again. We see white dudes who have, again, you see the truck, a Confederate flag on the back. They see a Black dude running and they treat this Black dude like the others who have utilized this citizen's arrest against Black people before. They use it in the very same way. And so, again, the body of evidence is really heavy on multiple cases and multiple stories on Black people being lynched for the assumption of guilt. We got lots of those stories, particularly in this part of the world. So for you to ignore all of that mound of probable cause and evidence that is out there just around the social society that exists there, to turn it into it's just an isolated incident of some idiots being idiots, I think is
gracious,
intellectually irresponsible.
Intellectually responsible, or just very gracious. This is like, oh well, you're just giving that, you're loading up on the benefit of the doubt there, right, in a lot of things. But someone would come back and they would say, but yeah, man, all that stuff you just talked about, lynching and slaves, all that stuff is back then. Obviously, we don't have this stuff happening now. So,
anti-lynching law
how long does that?
It just went on the books. Anti-lynching laws just went on the books.
I know,
just like last year. And people have for decades have been trying to get anti-lynching laws. And to your point that you said earlier, Antwuan, there's always been this resistance to equality and treatment of equality in this country. And part of that resistance, one of the evidences of that resistance, is that people have been fighting against anti-lynching laws in the country until recently. So that's just a little dime in the bucket for you there, right?
It is another. Well, let's I see Christine.
I see Mike in there too. What's up, Mike?
With the comment, that makes a lot of sense. Especially if you don't have anything to lose. Yeah, because the fight is not your fight, so it's easy to look at a situation and be like, it's not that bad, and to say, to do that when the effects of those thoughts don't reach you, fully, except that you have to hear about it, from people like us. Real quick though, I want to touch on one other thing before I don't know how close we are to wrapping up, but there's something I want to hit. I wanted to hit on this vigilante aspect. Yeah. Right, because I think again in the midst of the Kyle Rittenhouse, and we haven't talked a whole lot about that. We don't need to, but another thing that connects
there is something from a vigilante standpoint that I think works.
There's another thing that connects these two cases, which is this concept that a citizen decides that they have the right to, right a wrong. In this case, both citizens, whether it's Kyle or these three men, would say that they are protecting someone else's property. It's not their property. It's someone else's property. Right. And so it's easy for me on this side to say, well, we don't need to have vigilante laws like that. At the same time, though, if I'm walking down the street and there's a man beating a woman, I feel like I need to get in that to separate that man from that woman or that child or whatever. Right now, if it's two men, but for some reason in my head, there's a sense that if there's an injustice happening as I'm walking down the street, if there's a person robbing a store, that I'm supposed to do something. I'm not just supposed to walk by and act like I didn't see that. So on some level, when you talk about the two different spectrums of this sort of vigilante, if we can neutralize the term, I know it has a real sound to it, but Batman was a vigilante, right? So if we can neutralize the term, it is these people who see wrongs and take it upon themselves to right those wrongs outside of police. You know, where is the responsibility for us in the midst of all of that? We can see these damaging ways that this vigilante spirit has shown up and continues to show up. We see it with the way the abortion law has been sort of passed in Texas. The methodology for that, it has a really vigilante kind of aspect to it. Not abortion itself, but the law that, you know, citizens can take other citizens to court, you know, and all of that, all those things. We see that in the militia context. We saw it with the January 6th context. You could even say that the riots, the protests in some ways are a kind of vigilante activity. Where is it? Where do you think the line is where one should get involved in matters that are not connected to them? And what level of responsibility do we have toward that? Because I think that conversation is going to be one that determines how we respond to much larger things like voting and the next elections. I think when you start to see militias show up, they're going to say that they are righting a wrong in the system, and their sort of moral high ground will be that they're being vigilantes against the evil tyrannical government
at that point.
Patriots, you know, against the evil tyrannical whatever, left or right or whoever it is that they decide to declare their enemy. So where does this vigilante thing sit in our American context? I think it's come up. I don't know that we're gonna get it all figured out, but
I'd love to hear what they have to say.
Shows up here.
Saying like what is it that should determine whether, if I'm hearing your question correctly, Antwuan, to determine whether someone can take a kind of vigilante approach, right? That they can intervene.
Because there's moments where it's heroic, right?
Sure, that's you know, that's part of what I love about Batman, right? Like the police can't get to the space, so Batman is the one who's kind of taking, you know, law into his own hands, right? So, you know, is there
and if my daughter's getting dragged down the street by some dude, I hope there's a guy. There's a part of me that feels like I hope that there's a guy who would see that.
Guy? Can I get like you know, some female that comes in there and does it too,
or a female, you know? So I hope that somebody,
the equalizer. I want her in there.
the Queen Latifah. Exactly, there it is. But I want somebody to be like, hey, you can't do that to her. Even though they don't, you know, like there's a part of me that is open to that. You know, there's a part of me that's open to some of that. And then there's the other part of me, I'm like, who are you to show up and do this for someone else in another scenario, right? I felt there's some inconsistency in my own thinking with that.
Well, here's, if I was to put a differentiation on it, and you can, you know, there's pieces of the Kyle Rittenhouse case that I'm not as familiar with as the Ahmaud Arbery, because I think there's other things in it. But let's just take Ahmaud Arbery's case. Like, I think one of the great determinants of whether you should interact and jump in on vigilante activity is if you are actually witnessing a crime. If you are actually witnessing somebody doing something they shouldn't be doing, right? Like we have this sort of hindsight around this Ahmaud Arbery case, in that we are getting all these information sort of after the fact, right? We're seeing videos of Ahmaud Arbery going through this half-built house, and so we're going, oh, he was quote unquote, at least in the time about a year ago, everybody's like, oh, well, maybe he was robbing something from the house. These guys, for all intents and purposes that I understand, they didn't see him do anything. Like, they didn't see him do anything. They saw him running, and they made assumptions that he must have been doing something. And then they jumped in as vigilantes. So I mean, it's helpful to your point. You bring up these engagements where you're going, hey, if I see somebody beating, I'll just say, a man beating a woman in the middle of the street, like, I'll intervene. Why? Because I'm watching him beat a man in the middle of the street, or a woman in the middle of the street. If I see a man running and I go, oh my gosh, you know what? He's probably running because he was just beating his wife down the street. I know that's what happens on this. I've heard other people on this neighborhood beat their wives. This is the one that probably has been doing it. I'm going to get my car, I'm going to run this down and arrest this person. That's a different type of vigilantism, right? That is a bias-based assumptions of profiling that you're doing there. And I think that's what's part of the piece that we're seeing, right?
Yeah,
that's my thought.
I think that's good. I think that's good. And I also think, in addition to that, you got to get the police involved eventually. Like, on some level, what you're doing is trying to stall the situation.
Sure.
So the
and
law
I think they
can
called
come
the police.
and correct it.
Ahmaud Arbery's case.
Yeah, because the conversation, I think vigilante is going to be a thing that we deal with in the short-term future. But it's weird because some people see vigilante and they hear that's a negative. That's a pejorative. That's like, oh my gosh, these people taking the law into their own hands. Right. And other people hear vigilante and they, like I said, they hear it as heroic. And so when we're having a conversation around
a survey, I want to find out who these people are.
Like, who?
What's the demographic? What do these folks? Is there a particular group that tends to go this direction and tends to think this way? I'd just be curious.
Yeah, because I mean, is it an all or none kind of situation? Like, how
Carrie down there.
Carrie, yeah, my brain.
Talking for an hour.
All the things. Yeah, Carrie's like, so where's the role of the police? And it's a good question. That's a great question. Like, the police are if the police are there, okay, if there's a police right there, then I'm like, hey, there's a man that is beating a woman. Go get that. I would probably do that. If there's no police around, then maybe I don't. Or, and this is the part where people start to, there can be a relationship between the way white America and those who would ascribe to militias and all that kind of stuff, and the way Black America has responded. Or maybe you don't trust that the police will do something about what you told them. Therefore, you feel like you have to do something yourself and resort to some other means in order to get justice, in order to, for something that has been wrong to be made right. And you have to somehow go around the police. And that's a whole other thing, right? But
that's
but vigilantism, I just on one hand, it's like, oh man, we're gonna go down here and protect these businesses from the rioters, which to me sounds good. If I had a business down there and some people gonna protect it, great. I guess that's fine. But Carrie's right. Like, but the police are really, like, whose responsibility really is it to protect that property? And if I were to shoot someone down,
there to protect it, like,
and if I were to shoot someone down while protecting someone else's property, am I legally protected in that shooting?
Yeah, or
not? I'm legally protected to protect my own property. I don't know that I can shoot a criminal that's going into your house, Marcus.
I think you can. I think that's part of the idea.
Part of the deal?
Yeah, I think that's part of the many states. I mean, not all, but particularly the South. I mean, it's part of this sort of militia attitude. It goes back to, hey, if these group of slaves, you think about Nat Turner, right? Like, these group of slaves who break out and they band together and they start running down, heading towards, the Gulf of Mexico, and they're killing and robbing and doing all kinds of stuff to head that way. And it wasn't police officers who came, right? Because it wasn't a monstrous police force. It was this militia mentality of, you can get together as a group and you can go and stop those guys, and you're perfectly legal in your legal rights to do that. Protecting other people's property is another piece of it. I'd love to, again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't have all the ins and out of that.
All the
We've seen
details.
that historically.
And I'm just bringing it up as a question.
Yeah,
I don't know that we're
well,
going to answer it,
well,
but
but
it's part of the conversation, I think, going into 2022,
sure.
2023, I
Well,
think,
and
definitely
again,
2024.
what I think is helpful is to sort of neutralize it in the midst of white and black. Militias obviously are something in our country that have had a big history, that have been in the white community many times. Again, this is where the police even sort of birthed out of, is this idea to regulate slaves and to make sure they're doing what they're doing, and then also it grew into this place where it's helping, in the midst of a society, maintain order and all that kind of stuff, at least from a police standpoint. Militias, though, the black community has done the same thing. All right, like the Black Panthers ultimately were created, and this goes to the point: what is the role of the police? Right, the Black Panthers were created to protect their community from the police.
Right.
Because police were coming in and they were doing all this terrible things. They're like, you know what, we're going to practice our Second Amendment right. We're going to walk around with guns, shotguns, and things, and they would be in cars following police officers around to make sure that they acted right when they got to wherever they were going. So militias aren't necessarily just a white thing. There's black people do it too. It's just, what is the motivation behind these militias? And that would be, that would be an interesting. It's just something to recognize in the midst of
like I'm looking for the consistency
around vigilantism. How are communities, particularly in our construct of race in our society of America, when a vigilante action happens, what is the motivation for this vigilante action? And then which of those communities tend to, when do they raise up the vigilante as doing something good, and in what situations do they say the vigilante is doing something bad? That would be the question in the conversation about it.
Yeah, and I'm looking for some consistency around it. Again, I don't expect us to get it figured out today.
Oh, we lost him. He said we didn't figure it out today and just bailed on it. So yeah, we're probably not going to get that figured out today, but finding some consistency definitely would be a fun thing to do. It would be I don't know if it'd be an easy thing to do, but it'd definitely be a fun thing. I mean, what I would like is just some consistency of who is going to be on this call. You know what I mean? Because Antwuan just disappearing.
Am I here now? Am I back?
You're back.
I actually pressed some button on my keyboard, and it was just like, bloop. I don't even know what that button is. And next thing you know, I was out of here.
I was like, oh, I guess I'm just doing the show by myself. I guess I'll
by yourself now.
Up and be good.
Yeah, that's okay. It's good to know that I can get right back in.
Now, here's the thing about vigilantism that I'm really concerned about. And I said this for those of you who join us, Color Commentary is powered by Threaded, which is a racial reconciliation organization that's committed to inspiring relationships and reconciliation and collaborative action among the diverse body of Christ. And we have this membership area that we have called the Collective, the Threaded Collective, in which we create a space where people can come and learn even more and more things about how to engage this conversation well. But we also do a live Q&A each month there, where it's either myself and Antwuan, or myself and somebody else, or Antwuan and somebody else, but a live Q&A. And on the Q&A that we did yesterday, which to the end of the year right now, we've been doing live Q&As that are free. We talked about Kyle Rittenhouse for just a hot second. And, like, hey, is this a racial thing? Why is this coming into the racial conversation? And this idea of vigilantism is, I think, where if people are talking about race, that there's a little bit of worry about the precedent of it. And I think the Ahmaud Arbery case actually helps calm the nerves about the precedent. But the Kyle Rittenhouse vigilante precedent that people are thinking through is, if now white men are allowed to, or people, period, are allowed to get their guns, run into protests, start battles, start fights, and push people around, and then shoot victims and get away with it, then obviously those who are prone to protest the most, which tend to be the marginalized, the ones that need to be heard, those who protest the most, are now in a situation where they may have less protections from the law. If they're protesting and somebody runs in and starts a fight with them and shoots them, if the Kyle Rittenhouse case is a precedent to what lawyers will use to kind of try, our judges and lawyers will use as they try that case, then it's very possible that it is emboldening people, if it's going to end like Kyle Rittenhouse, to emboldening people to, when protests happen, that they run in there with their guns and they start shooting folks. And if they can't shoot them just right out, they'd be able to kind of kick them in, or do something to them, and then while they're getting attacked, they can shoot them and get, hey, I'm just like Kyle Rittenhouse. I was just trying to do something good. So that's where that precedence makes people of color nervous, because currently, in the current history of our country, the current area of our country, the majority of people who are protesting tend to be protesting for Black people, and they tend to be Black people. Now, we've seen an emergence of more white people in the midst of protests, and obviously on January 6th of last year, we saw a protest that turned into an insurrection, if you will, that was predominantly white. So I think the precedent could be, it's just something that people are recognizing, right? So it's interesting. So that's where some of that comes in. Did you see somebody on the chat that had something that was fun? Or no,
I saw that, Julie, I'll repost reshow the video here. I mean, the comment, vigilante or lynch, a vigilante or a lynch mob race seems to play a role. Certainly seems to play a role in what we call it. What many call it. Some people call it vigilantism, and other people call it, a mob, and so it does.
But that's the word, lynch mob, right? Like, that's
lynch mob. Yeah.
That is that key piece.
Yeah.
I think what Julie has there, you know what I mean, was this, particularly in the Ahmaud Arbery, was this hearkening back to what it would have looked like throughout the history of this country when a lynch mob decided to do something. I mean, if you really think about it, it's a lot like the Emmett Till case. It's a lot like the Emmett Till, right? Like in fact, there's literally less evidence here than in the Emmett Till situation, where Emmett Till supposedly whistled at a white woman, and then all of a sudden this mob, not huge, but a small mob came, got him, shot him, put him in the river, and murdered him. Right. It's essentially the kind of same thing. That was on speculation. That was on hearsay. Right. The people who killed him didn't actually witness him doing this quote unquote crime of whistling at a white woman. And yet they took it upon themselves to bring quote unquote justice in their eyes to the situation. Where in the Ahmaud Arbery case, again, they didn't see a crime happen, but they assumed one. And then took it upon themselves to now intervene and to try to, take justice upon themselves, in that they were going to kind of keep him locked in. They were going to keep him pinned in so the police come. But then even the, and we said this at the beginning, even the release of this video, which I think was released by the man named Brian, who was one of the suspects, the release of this video, the taking of this video, was supposed to be used to exonerate them. Like, he turned on the video so that they could be exonerated whatever happened. And he thought this video would exonerate them, and it's actually turned into probably the main reason why they themselves actually got off. Right.
Yeah.
So
and this is
or got the penalty. Sorry.
And to something that you said, taking the law into your hands. The problem with taking the law into your hands is what you just said, is that when you do that, you make yourself judge, jury, and executioner. When in this country, you have a right to trial, and you have a right to make your case. And so when a vigilante comes up and says you're guilty, and therefore I'm going to execute some sort of punishment, it feels like it's a violation of that fundamental innocent until proven guilty kind of thing. Unless, like you said, you see it in the act. Like you said, you're right there in the act. But yeah, it does. It just presents several kinds of issues for sure.
Do you think, because I've heard this, right? And I know you can look at the chat while I'm talking about it to the folks. Again, the video, we talked about this earlier, how important the video was in this situation. This is, again, very similar to Trayvon Martin's situation, right? It was, again, somebody with the assumption, somebody who has a kind of bias. They live in an area where maybe there's been crime and theft. And what this gentleman did who killed Trayvon Martin is he said, these guys always get away with it, right? And so he intervened on an assumption. And then, of course, trying to intervene, he got more than he could handle. And then he ended up having to kill Trayvon Martin because out of self-defense. And I think it's Julie that is saying something very similar, right? Or I think it was, or maybe, that was Carrie saying they can just say that they felt threatened and then shoot. I wonder if we had a video of Trayvon Martin, if that case would have ended the same way. Right.
Yeah.
And again, it poses the question, if we didn't have a video here, would we have seen the same?
Would we have seen this?
People need they need, in these situations where people of color are being killed and shot, they need a video for it to
because the accusation of racism or race related is just not feasible enough. Brian brings up an interesting thing. He said, I wonder if the same outrage will happen over that black guy running over and killing a bunch of white people at the parade at Wisconsin. And I think, there's been a lot of outrage about that for certain. Here's the difference, Brian, between cases like what happened in Wisconsin and the cases that we typically highlight. No, there is not a question in people's minds that the guy who ran those people over in Wisconsin is going to receive justice, right? The reason that the issues that we bring up are brought up is because there's the element of the crime itself, and then there's the element of how the system responds to that crime. And the question is in the minds of many when there's a black person involved as the victim of a crime, that the justice system will actually see their case as something to defend or something to protect and correct. No, there is no doubt in mine or anyone else's mind that this black guy that ran over a bunch of people at this parade is not going to get what's coming to him from a justice point of view.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Nobody is going to, there's nothing to argue about yet. Yeah. We're mad at him, and we should be. He should not have done that. And even if it turns out it's race related, I'll be willing to accept that. But here's the deal. The justice system is going to appropriately deal with him. There's no question about whether the justice is going to deal with him. There is a question in the minds of many black people when something like that happens to a black neighborhood, whether the persons who did that would actually get the justice. So the question is not simply about the person who did the crime, but about how the system will respond to that person. To what level of accountability will the system hold? Will the judicial system hold these people accountable? And so no, you're probably not going to get a lot of racial those who are
Al Sharpton's not
working toward race related things. If he gets away clean, if they somehow call him innocent, then at that point you say, well, I want to hear about this justice conversation, and then now your statement has a little more legs to it. But at this point, nobody's expecting him to get away with anything, whereas justice is about whether people are going to get away with stuff.
And here's the case in point. I'm sitting here and I'm kind of listening and watching news to see if anything kind of breaks that we can pull in. They just showed a video of this guy in handcuffs and shackles on his feet in a courtroom. They just showed this dude. This happened 2-3 days ago? This dude is in a courtroom today, standing before a judge to start going on this thing. He's in jail. They brought him out of jail to put him before a judge. This Ahmaud Arbery case went for a month, 2 months?
30 days at least.
30 days that nobody even was talking about. And the only reason we know anything about it is because there's a video that got leaked. That's the difference. Is we are not worried whether this black man is going to receive. And again, thinking about it from building sort of a case of how history deals with people. History has always dealt terribly with black people. Again, nobody ever questions that. I mean, I'm sure there's exceptions, there's things and black people who've gotten off, but historically what we've actually seen more of is that black people get wrongly convicted of things and they have to be exonerated later, right? We talk about the Central Park crew, right? We see a lot of that. We see groups like the International Justice Mission have to come in and EJM, the Equal Justice Mission, EJI, thank you. I'm getting them all moved out. EJI coming in is created to get people off of death row because 1 in 9 people on death row it's shown that they are actually innocent, right? And so those are the kinds of things that Black people, it's never been a question whether Black people are going to receive.
Right. And this is an important thing for people to understand, because I run into, and I'm not sure that this is Brian or not, but I run into a lot of white people and they're focused on the crime and not the system's response to the crime. And that's where I think a lot of the conversation is just missing, because a lot of people are like, hey, well, how come you're not mad at Black on Black crime? Black on Black Lives Matters, right? How come you're mad at Black on Black crime? That's because Black on Black crime gets prosecuted. Mm-hmm. It gets prosecuted. Nobody's getting away with it. You know what I'm saying? The issue is not about, sure, we don't want the crime, but Black dude killing another Black dude, the judge is not throwing out the case. The issue that we're bringing up has to do with how is the system responding. So when you say, hey, there's not going to be Black leaders praying with the family, sure, there's probably many leaders praying with the family of those families of those. They had a vigil the day afterwards. And I saw Black, white, and otherwise pastors a part of that with them. Mm-hmm. But they're not going to come and sit with the family in court, because they're not worried that justice is not going to be served in the court. There's nothing to contest yet. It's going to be, now, if they prove that it's going to be something that he thinks he's going to get away with such clear evidence, then yes, you protest at that point. But no one's worried that that's not going to happen. There's a difference in the conversation. And this is why when people talk about the systemic aspects of the racial conversation, they're talking about how does the law treat crimes. It's not just the crimes themselves. The subject in question is the system and how it's responding, in addition to, in some cases, what the individual did. And that's, I think, again, a difference between how people are approaching the conversation.
Yeah. And I think, looking at even more on the chat and going, I think continuing the conversation that you're having here with it, Brian, in that in most white criminals are in cuffs, etc., within days of a crime. Again, perhaps they are. In the Ahmaud Arbery case, which is what we're talking about here, that was not the case, right? And even if they are, even if that is true, again, what we're talking about here is there is still the situation of if they've committed a crime, particularly in a Black neighborhood against a Black person, even though they may be in cuffs the next day, will they be ultimately found not guilty for their situation? Again, the caseload where that situation has happened, where white people have done vigilante, violent, terrorist things to Black people and Black communities, the caseload that shows that white people get off on that is much larger than the caseload that would show a Black person who went into a white community, killed, vigilante, and terrorized Black. It's just the caseload is much larger. So that's why it's not the same. It's not.
All right, Marcus. So the last thing before we get off, because I know we got to wrap it up, is okay. So we are Christians. We are believers in the gospel, and of course, we don't live in a bubble as Christians. We live in a society. We live in culture. We live in a kind of Babylon. I know people don't like to think about America as a Babylon, but we live in a kind of Babylon, right? We're Daniels, right? So what is...
Oh, you just opened up. That's like a whole nother podcast.
I know, right? Are we in Babylon now? Or are we going to Babylon? Anyway, but here we are. So we're Christians. We talked a lot about this from a social point of view, Black, and a lot of the ways we respond to it from our viewpoints and thoughts. What do we do with this as believers? With these cases, what is how do we reflect the love of Jesus? The great question in life, right, that we should always be asking is, how do I love like Jesus in this scenario? Like over and 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 over again, every time, right? So here we are again with the really difficult high standard that Jesus sets for us, frustratingly high. How do we love like Jesus in the middle of all of this?
I want to hear
heavy.
It's a heavy
one. We don't hear from some of the people. Like, what do y'all think? Like, how do we love like Jesus in the middle of this? Here's one of the things I'll say. I think Christians, we go to Philippians, he says, be motivated by or think on these things.
Right.
And the first thing he says is whatsoever is true. Right. And
Yep.
so I think that believers are about truth. Loving others well includes living into what is real, what is actual, what is true. And so I think that defending the truth is a part of what it means to love each other well. And I think that's a part of it. And that's part of our challenge. How do we know what's true? How do we pursue the true thing? He says things, whatever is true, whatever is just, is also in that list, whatever is lovely, and he gets into some other things. But I think that what we want to do is, as we're having conversations about these two cases, remember that our enemy is sin and Satan, racism and division and pride and arrogance are some of his best tools in situations like this. And I think that we can pursue truth, speak truth with humility and with an eye toward rescuing relationships. And that might sometimes mean that we hit a little bit and we draw out, and we hit a little bit and we draw out. But I think it's important for us to remember it's more important to keep the relationship than even sometimes to be right in the moment. You know, you're ultimately, in my opinion, you're ultimately going to be right in the sense that you keep the conversation moving, right? You don't end the conversation, you don't end the relationship. You keep the relationship and you continue wrestling together, right, forward. And so I would pray that these conversations can get urgent and passionate, and we can easily start to cause us to see other people as super duper negative. And so I think we got to try to figure out the balance between defending what is true and loving others well, and praying for the Holy Spirit to give us the wisdom and the clarity for how to do that, because I don't think we're going to do it on our own.
Yeah, and as you were talking, I was thinking about this Sermon on the Mount, right? I was thinking about the unrepentant servant. I was thinking about a lot of those things in which these gentlemen who did this, horrific act. It can be very easy for us to kind of separate ourselves from them, to be like, oh, they're a different kind of person than I am, right? They are less than I, and therefore they deserve whatever kind of punishment they get. They should be killed. They should be hung. I hear people say things like that. I think they should hang them. I think that they should be, on the death penalty, and all these different things. And, we live in a society that has kinds of responses to crimes and whatnot. But from a Christian standpoint, what we have to recognize is, you're thinking of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, if you even look at your brother with hate, right? If you even think about your brother with hate, you might as well have just killed him, right? So even our response to people who
murder charges are coming to you,
for your thoughts,
for your thoughts, for your angry thoughts,
and even your words, like to say, "Oh, I hate these guys." You might as well have just killed them. So it's just something for us to remember. Like, we have to recognize that the same grace that is poured upon us must be, and this is hard for me to say in the midst of this moment. I'm just going to be honest with that. Just going to be honest. This is flesh part of Markus does not want to say this next phrase, but I'm going to. The same amount of grace that has been lavished on us in the midst of our own sin is that same amount of grace is offered to these men who killed Ahmaud Arbery from Christ himself. And if we are going to be imitators of God, therefore as dearly loved children, as it says in the Bible, then we are to lavish that kind of grace. That does not mean that they don't go to jail. It does not mean that there aren't repercussions for their actions. But in the ways that we see them, we recognize that they are not completely disqualified from the grace of God, because there are people who have done all kinds of heinous, horrible things in the Bible and in our world that have been given the same kind of grace. And I love that in the Bible you run into some of these cats and that grace is lavished upon them, right? Paul being one of them that you can think of. Obviously David and some of the things that he did. You can see some of those things. So it's just, for me, I'm having to remember that it's be very easy for me to now dehumanize these men for what they did, but I would only be now becoming the very villain that I am against, because ultimately they dehumanized Ahmaud Arbery. And so to dehumanize them would make me just like them. And in many cases, I am just like them. So
Yeah.
understand that, and for the grace of God, here I stand.
Yeah. Well, and that's good. The Sermon on the Mount is always the challenging for everybody in the conversation. Is the challenging sermon for, I think, these racial conversations, because it's the place where Jesus sounds the most ridiculous and impractical, where he's basically saying, "Hey, I want you to love your enemies," and it sounds good on paper, and it
Or it's
feels
easy
good
to say, you
to
can
know
read
that
it.
to know, we like, well, Jesus did it, but boy, it doesn't make sense. And what does that even mean? By the way, Jesus, what does it mean to love my to love my enemy? Like, what exactly does that? What are you asking me to do? And then he gives these examples, these legal examples of the right cheek and the cloak and going the extra mile. These are matters of law that he's dealing with, not God's law, their law that was right in front of them.
Yeah.
So he says, no, it has very practical application. The standard that Jesus lays for us as we follow him is extremely high, but it is the thing that would call, if he's lifted up, that it would draw others into him. So I think we have to figure out how to manage our thoughts. The scripture says, bring every thought into captivity, into obedience of Christ. What do we do with these thoughts that we have, and how do we mind them and bring them forward into things that further the cause of the kingdom and bring justice, biblical justice, if you will, to the world around us? Tough to do, but it's good enough to pray for it and mean it, right? It's good enough to really to truly desire it and say, God, help me with it, and mean what you're saying, and be willing to let them take the lead there. And that may be all it takes for a situation like this, where you're like, I don't know what it looks like to be like Jesus in this scenario. It's enough to want to be like him, though, and to ask God to show you what that looks like. And that might just be the next step as we continue to deal with this minefield of stuff that we're always dealing with. But we can't let our witness go. We can't sacrifice our witness in the midst of these very tough, difficult conversations, because then the enemy just gets bonus points.
Right. And there's no one here to be ambassadors of reconciliation, right? We are here, not necessarily, again, I'm just talking about in the sense of who are the people who are going to model this understanding of grace and seeing people fully human, even in the midst of their mistakes and in the midst of their terrible moments and times. Who is going to be the model to show that there is a God who does the same? So, man, this has been great, Antwuan. Excited, glad to have the folks in the chat. I know.
Okay, real quick, before you sound like you're closing, I want to give this one challenge to the 10 people in the room.
All right.
Go to the YouTube channel and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Here's the deal: we need to get to 100 so that the URL that I'm about to show you doesn't look like that. We want it to say youtube.com/wearethreaded. Currently, it says this, right?
Can you read that
and
for
that's
us?
because the reason it says that is because we have to get to 100 followers before we can add a custom thing to the back end, and we're at 51. So I know that if you're on this call, you're probably like someone who follows us and what have you.
Sure.
Do us the favor, just jump over to YouTube, click this link, jump over to YouTube and subscribe to the channel and help us get that number up so that we can have a better looking deal, and obviously so that you can stay connected to all the things that we're doing as well on YouTube. But if you'd be willing to do that, that'd be fantastic. All right.
That's great.
You can,
that's
you can
perfect. That's perfect. And if you're looking for, in the midst of this holiday season, as you're getting to the end of the year and you're looking for organizations to support and the work that they're doing, we would love to have your support. We'd love for you to become a monthly donor of Threaded. If you are not, whatever amount is great. And also, if you are looking for a space to continue learning, to hear from experts in the field continually, become a part of the Threaded Collective. That Threaded Collective is a place where we put all kinds of learning. We have live Q&As like this each month. We have different things that each of our team are bringing out there. And we'd love for you to be a part of that. That's $10 a month or $100 for the year. It's a great way to support this ministry and also to continue to grow in yourself. If you want to do that, wearethreaded.org/collective, right? wearethreaded.org/collective. This is Color Commentary, and man, we've had a good time with you guys. I think they can share this out on their social medias as well. Just for people who maybe didn't get in, maybe they're in the midst of cooking or doing whatever, but they want to hear the conversation. Share it out. Get the stuff out there for us if you can, so that we can continue to help those folks who are out there like yourself, who are trying to figure out what to do in the midst of this conversation and how to approach it. And we want them to see a Christian approach for this. So share it out there to your socials. And man, thank you for coming back. And we will see you next time on Color Commentary. This is a place we want you to hear about the different lenses that are out there, to look through those colorful lenses. And as we say every week, and as you do that, stay colored.